Hello, my friends. It's Nick, the ASMR nerd, and welcome to another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Today we're taking a look at, well, not a mechanical keyboard exactly. In fact, today we're looking at two related products from a company called Mountain. You might know Mountain for their mechanical keyboards. I've reviewed two of them here on the channel before, the Mountain Everest Max and the Mountain Everest 60, and I came away really impressed with both of them, but the Everest 60 especially is one of my favorite keyboards of this year. So Mountain has recently put out two new products that are a little bit more specialized than those keyboards, but in the same vein. The first is the Mountain MacroPad. The second is the Mountain DisplayPad. These are accessories for people who want to increase their control options, to have more buttons and shortcuts and macros and access to quick actions and things like that. People like streamers, maybe they want something like this. People like content creators who are doing a lot of video or audio editing might really benefit from something like this. Or gamers could benefit from either of these. So there's a lot of potential use cases for the MacroPad and DisplayPad. The MacroPad comes in at $60 US. The DisplayPad comes in at $110 US. However, I should make you aware of the fact that right now, at the time of this video's release, it is still November 2022, and Mountain has their Black November sale going on. So these are actually quite discounted. I believe the MacroPad is available for $40 and the DisplayPad for, I think, $80, as well as their keyboards, including the Everest 60, which I love so much. Normally it's on for $140, which I think is an awesome price for that keyboard, but right now it's on sale for $80, which is an insane steal. Like, it's probably the best keyboard deal that I can think of in that price range. So this isn't a sponsored message or anything like that. I just wanted to let you guys know because I really like that keyboard and it's on for really cheap until the end of November. So if you're interested in checking it out, you can go pick one up on their website. But yeah, so these guys are also on sale right now, but I will be evaluating them at their full regular MSRP price because that's only fair. That's their usual price. So we're going to be taking a look at the MacroPad and the DisplayPad today, doing a detailed unboxing with each of them, checking out the functionality and software. Then we will come back here. I will let you know about the usage experience with these products. Then finally, I will break down the pros and the cons and give you my final verdict. If you'd like to skip around the video, there are timestamps down in the video description or links, chapter markers, I should say, in the play bar down at the bottom of the video here, and I encourage you to use them. So without further ado, let's take a closer look at Mountain's MacroPad and DisplayPad. And here we have the Mountain MacroPad with 12 customizable macro keys and per key RGB illumination. So the packaging is exactly in keeping with Mountain's other packaging, which is to say really nice. They have this matte black background, this glossy image of the product here, the Mountain logo, product name, and this is all kind of on a sleeve, a slip that covers the box. We have all kinds of product information on the side, packaging contents including the MacroPad itself, a stand, a cable wrap, a key and switch removal tool, and a quick start guide and stickers, and then product specs over here as well. On the sides, you can see that interior box. this is clearly an international package designed for sale all around the world with all the different languages here. And then on the back, we have a big listing of all kinds of features, again, in a bunch of different languages. So they are touting this product's 12 customizable macro keys, flexible mounting options to mount to either your Everest Max or Core, or mount it separately to the stand. Removable USB Type-C cable, custom stand, hot swappable switches, which is nice. By default, I believe it comes with the tactile 55 switches of Mountain's own design, which I checked out back in my Mountain Everest 60 review, and I thought they were really good. They are great little switches. And of course the Basecamp software, which is going to be pretty key to the functioning and functionality of this product. As usual, it's nice to see Mountain has partnered with Plastic Bank in order to remove or reduce plastic waste. You will see that reflected in their packaging as well. I really do like it when companies try and reduce plastic waste and make their packaging as reusable or recyclable as possible. So let's take off the slip cover here. Put that over here. Reach your summit, which is the slogan we've seen on other Mountain products before. It's embossed in a glossy print here. The Mountain logo down here. And then, just like their other products, we have this really stylish closure where we have a magnetic flap on the front here. Pop. Pop. It just pops off like that. And of course the Mountain logo there. So we just go pop and we open it up. And inside we have something. This might be the case, or the stand. I mean, I guess that's the stand. We also have up here a little product guide, I'm guessing, in a little pocket. This is becoming more popular these days, these little envelopes or little pockets inside the box to contain the documentation. Innovation, performance, aesthetics, customization, the Mountain design mission. We've seen this on other Mountain products previously too, so all of their packaging design is nicely unified. Here's our quick start guide, as promised. Very easy. Straightforward stuff. And here are our stickers, which you can adorn your PC case or laptop or whatever with, should you wish to. Your water bottle, that's where I used to put all my stickers. There we go. Okay. And then here we have the product itself. So let's lift out the MacroPad. It's quite tightly nestled within this foam packaging here. And we'll take a closer look at that in a moment. We've also got this base here, which is very heavy. It's like shockingly hefty. It's like a solid chunk of metal. I mean, it's plastic on the outside, but there's very clearly a big chunk of metal in there. And then this is the bottom of the case. I keep calling it a case. Why? The bottom of the stand with the Mountain logo on it. And this big rubberized pad, which has an amazing peel to it. That was great. So this is, yeah, just a big rubber anti-slip pad, which looks really nice and is of course matched with the blue of the case, or the box. the other aesthetic going on here. So cool. That's neat. Like I said, really heavy. Underneath that, there's our combination switch and keycap puller. Not branded, so it's just generic, but it will do the job. And just like our other mountain products we've looked at here on the channel before, this lovely, heavy, braided, sleeved cable, where you've got this nice fabric braided sleeving in black with USB-A on one end, mountain branding, and USB-C on the other, similarly branded there. Very nice. These are really high quality cables, so those are great. I think that's everything. So we've just got the foam packaging in here, packing to keep everything nice and safe in transit and transportation, but that's it. So we'll take a quick peek at the MacroPad itself, or maybe a less quick peek, a longer peek, shall we say, since that's the actual product here. So here's the MacroPad. It has a brushed aluminum top plate, just as the Everest Max, Everest Core, and Everest 60 have, which is nice. It's got the same design language where it kind of rolls over the edges a little bit. And then the back is black plastic ABS, mountain logo there, USB Type-C port, information and certifications down here, and that's really that. So I'm really curious to find out how this mounts to the Everest Max or Core. I guess the mechanism is just right here, but I'm not quite clear on that, so we'll have to experiment with that in a moment. I will say the MacroPad unit itself is quite light. It feels pretty hollow. It feels like there's not a lot going on inside here. Really, I think it's just plastic so that it sits at an angle and is sort of ergonomically angled towards you. In terms of the keys, we have 12 keys here, and these keycaps appear to be of the UV-coated ABS variety, and indeed they are, which is, I understand why they did this. They did this because those are the keycaps that the Everest Max ships with. But I would have preferred to see the PBT double shot keycaps that come stock on the Everest 60. Regrettably, however, we just have these UV coated ABS caps, which I criticized in my Everest Max review for being kind of chintzy. They are a bit on the thin side, and because this is simply a coating over top of translucent plastic, over time is prone to wear, and it could rub off and you might lose your legends. You probably have to use it quite a bit for that to happen, but it's certainly in the realm of possibility. I've had older keyboards with a similar kind of coated keycap before, which did eventually start to wear. And again, I assume they included this style of keycap for aesthetic compatibility with the Everest Max, rather than the thicker PBT type from the Everest 60. And they are labeled M1 through M12, Macro 1 through Macro 12, presumably. Here we have one of those mountain tactile 55 switches. They're really solid. It's a 55 gram force actuation. It's got a nice distinct bump to it. It is tactile. It is factory lubricated, so it's nice and smooth. And we've got this translucent upper housing. Let's just pull this out because it is hot swappable. So this is not the included switch puller, but it's the one I'm going to use here because it's the one I have handy. There we are. We have the translucent polycarbonate upper housing to allow the RGB to shine through. We've got this lens up at the top here, which will help amplify the light from the LEDs below. We have this nylon, I think, bottom housing or something like that, translucent bottom housing. This is a conventional mechanical switch, makes physical contact with the leaf inside. But they are good ones. They are great ones, actually, at stock here. Significantly better than cherry switches, in my opinion, or other sort of budget alternatives like Gatoron or Aotemu. 2 contact pins on the bottom. This is a 3-pin design, but the PCB can accept 3-pin or 5-pin switches. We have a black PCB underneath. We have an LED north facing there. These are OEM profile keycaps by the looks of it, although it's all just a fixed profile for the MacroPad. There's no sculpting or anything like that. If we look at it from the side, you'll see they're both the same height, both rows here. And that's pretty much what there is to that. There's no stabilizers because there's no longer keys. They sound and feel about the same as the switches on the Everest Max, or the keys on the Everest Max, which is to say fine, but not incredible, because there's really no dampening going on in here. It would have been nice, again, for them to include maybe some dampening foam or some nice dense silicone in here to help dampen the feel and sound. That would, of course, be in line with what they did with their Everest 60, but again, not with the Everest Max. The Everest Max has this kind of setup where there's really no dampening in there to speak of. I would really love for them to do Everest Max 2.0 or something to that effect, where they apply the lessons learned with the Everest 60 to the Max and the Core. But anyway, this follows on closely with the design of the Max. And it's not such a big deal in terms of sound for an add-on like this, because you're not doing your primary typing on here, of course. Really, you're just kind of punching keys as you need them. But anyhow, okay, so how does this case work? Or this case, why do I have this? How does this stand work? Seems I struggle with this thing. I see, so I think this just goes like so. This goes like so, and then this simply slots in like that. There it is, just like that. So this can sit as a standalone item on your desk, and I must say, actually, it sounds and feels better once it's attached to the stand, because the solidity and weightiness of the stand really helps to counteract the hollowness of the MacroPad itself. So that's cool. That leaves the USB-C port exposed, of course, so that you can plug it in. Now, I was under the impression, or I guess I assumed, that that there would also be a USB connection on this forward edge for plugging it into the Everest Max, but it looks like that may not be the case. I don't see any way for this to connect with the Max. So does that mean that if we use this and the DisplayPad on our Everest Max, we're going to have 3 USB cables? We're going to have this one, and the one from the DisplayPad, and the one from the keyboard itself. That seems a little excessive. And I would hope that Mountain had a more elegant solution because, again, you will recall, perhaps, well, I can show you. You don't have to recall. Let me show you. The Everest Max, of course, right here, has USB-C ports here and here, corresponding with the mounting spot for the media dock. So here and here, I had kind of hoped that this thing would be able to take advantage of those, but maybe it doesn't. So how does it mount? This seems like a good time to test it out. Let's see. So here's the Everest Max, or the Core. The Core is just the 10 keyless part of the Everest Max. To make it the Max, you add the removable numpad, like so, and the media dock, like so, wherever the plug is. There, like so. Then you have the Everest Max. But if we don't have those, we just have the Core. Also worth noting that this Everest Core has the gunmetal gray finish, aluminum, which doesn't actually match so well with the black finish on the MacroPad, but you can get the Core or the Max with the black finish to match as well. I don't know if they're making the MacroPad with the gunmetal gray though. I don't think they are, but I could be mistaken. So this should probably just kind of pop on. Is that how this goes? So just sort of slide on. I guess that's it. I guess it just kind of does that. Because we've kind of got the, this RGB lighting strip that's sandwiched between these two pieces of aluminum. And then I guess we just use this mount to kind of just jam it in there. And then it just kind of stays on there like so. It feels secure enough. It's not going to fall off or anything. And it does mean that you can affix it anywhere you want along the back except for where this USB-A port is, because you need to leave that exposed. But it also means that, I think we need one port here, one port, like one cable here, one cable there, and then if we have the display pad, then another cable here. That seems surprisingly inelegant. I had honestly expected them to integrate that a little better. Again, considering that we do have USB Type-C ports here and here, and we know that they can receive data from a peripheral in the form of this media dock. So, but we'll see. Maybe the DisplayPad will integrate, whereas the MacroPad does not. We're just going to have to find out. So on that note, let's take a look at the DisplayPad. We'll put the MacroPad back just for now, so it has a place to be. And we will take a look at the DisplayPad and see if it is a similar story. So here is the DisplayPad hardware in box. You can see the same kind of design, except instead of mechanical switches, we have 12 little screens that also act as buttons, much like an Elgato Stream Deck, for example. Exact same design aesthetic on the box here. Glossy image, logo, product name here. 12 customizable display keys on a stylish aluminum frame. Same kind of product information on the side there. On the back, Mountain advertises customizable display keys, flexible mounting options, removable Type-C cable, custom stand, supports GIF or GIF if you're one of those people, JPEG, PNGs, bitmaps, all kinds of image files, and Basecamp software as well. The inclusion of GIF is kind of fun. You could animate your little switches, your little keys. And even more so than the MacroPad, the display or the Basecamp software is going to be key to the functionality of the DisplayPad here. Now we kind of got an idea for how this is going to work from when we looked at the Everest Max's detachable numpad over here, because it, you might recall, has display keys right up at the top here, which are the same kind of thing. Each one has a little screen, and you can bind different functions, and of course have a different image for each of them. So we have some idea, some clue as to how this is going to work in the Basecamp software with the DisplayPad. Let's open it up and take a look at the hardware. Of course, as before, we have the quick start guide here, which I'm not going to pull out because it's going to be very similar, but there it is. We have the base here, not the case, the base, which means we get another delightful pull. Are you guys ready for this? Let's do it. Truly divine. And that's identical to the base that came with the MacroPad. They're nicely made. Like I said, they're very heavy. This nice big non-slip surface here. The mountain branding, the matching color, really good. Once again, we should have the same USB Type-C cable in here. Nice and supple, high quality, nicely sleeved. No switch puller though, which makes sense because there are no switches or keycaps to pull on the DisplayPad. And here is the DisplayPad itself. Let's just get the box out of the way. And it feels very much like the MacroPad, to no one's surprise. It is sized identically. It is simply the keys which are different. We've got another good pull here. Are you guys ready? Very nice. And there we have our bank of 12 display keys. Very, very shiny. This is the cleanest they're ever going to be, because once I get my mucky fingers all over them, they're just going to be fingerprint city. But that shouldn't be too visible when the DisplayPad is plugged in and you have your images on there, because the bright light from behind will kind of obscure the fingerprint situation. They are sitting almost flush with the brushed aluminum top plate here, but not quite. They do project a little bit, and actually they're just slightly cupped, each one slightly cupped, to sort of guide your fingers to them, which is nice, because the display keys on the numpad from the Macs are not actually, they're just a totally flat surface. They also have very shallow travel, so it'll be interesting to see if there's a little more travel on these ones or not. On the DisplayPad, let's see. Let's click them down. Okay, so about the same amount of travel, but the press is a little bit more satisfying. So not much in the way of travel, but yeah, they feel satisfying and sound satisfying enough to press. Underneath each clear key, of course, is a display. I think it's about 100 by 100 each one. Don't quote me on that. I should know. It might say on the box, actually. I think I read, though, around 100 by 100 each. Oh, no, on the sleeve. That's where the info is. So yes, 104 by 104 for each display key. So that's great. That's great. So that's pretty high res considering the size of these keys. They're pretty small. Once again, mountain logo on the back, USB Type-C right there, certifications, product name, serial number, all that. And once again, simply a featureless kind of attachment here. No USB Type-C connector integrated or anything like that, which frankly I'm pretty disappointed about. I had really thought that they would be able to leverage their existing design to integrate these a bit more seamlessly into the Everest Max and allow for a single cable solution, especially since that's exactly what they do with their numpad, right? It doesn't have a separate dedicated USB Type-C connector. You just plug it into the side of the core keyboard and away you go. But it does appear that with both the MacroPad and the DisplayPad, Mountain has opted to have only the one connection on the back, necessitating that you connect each one independently along with the keyboard by itself, thus requiring 3 USB ports, which seems like a real missed opportunity on Mountain's part, given that this whole thing is designed to be modular and sort of elegant. Obviously, it makes sense to have the external separate connector for when you have these independent like this. You know, if you just have this on the side of your desk and you're going to be using it like so, that is fine. But specifically, it would be really nice if they integrated direct connectivity to the Everest core. I assume there must be a technical reason why they did not, because I can't think of why else they wouldn't. It just seems like such a no-brainer to me. But anyway, there it is, mounted onto the Everest Max or core, and it just kind of sits there like that. You can press the keys, and that all seems well and good, but it's going to require a separate cable to connect, as far as I can see. And that's pretty much the long and the short of the hardware. There's not a whole lot more to see or talk about here. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Where it gets interesting, of course, is the customizability, the display keys, of course, and the ability to bind these to all kinds of different functions. So that's what we're going to take a look at next. We're going to fire up the Basecamp software. We will look at how the functionality for the MacroPad and the DisplayPad is integrated into that software. We'll take a little look at the RGB on the MacroPad and, of course, the display key functionality on the DisplayPad. Let's get to it. My friends, I have created a monster. Look at this. This is the Mountain Everest Max with optional numpad attached and the media dock, in addition to the MacroPad and the DisplayPad that we just unboxed. This is a truly maximalist keyboard setup, and it feels a little bit absurd, but also I feel powerful. I feel like I have so many buttons at my fingertips. So just to start things off here, the Everest Max and the numpad with the display keys and the media dock and all that, I'm not going to be going over those in this video. because I've already reviewed those, and there will be a link right up there for you to check those out if you'd like. But they're pretty cool pieces of kit. But for now, you could ignore them. Just wanted to point out though that this is really the full setup if you want to go the whole way with what Mountain has available to you. Also, I know that the display keys on the numpad right now look pretty blown out, so you probably can't see much going on there. You can just ignore those for now because we're not, again, really looking at those. We're much more interested in what's going on up here. And we will get to that display pad in a moment. But quickly, let's just talk about the RGB lighting. So as you can see, we have some RGB lighting on our MacroPad here, just as we do on our keyboard here, our Everest Max. They both have the rainbow wave type lighting effect. They both look really nice. Fortunately, in the software, you can synchronize both the lighting effects and the brightness across your devices, and that automatically syncs it between the keyboard and the numpad, which is really nice. Of course, or the keyboard and the MacroPad, I should say. The numpad too, but the MacroPad is the key here. You can also see that the finish on the keycaps and the shine through effect and the fonts and all that are nicely matched between the MacroPad and the keyboard itself. The only challenge is that the MacroPad and the DisplayPad are only available in black, I believe. I should probably double check that, but I'm pretty sure they're only available in black. If that's not the case, I'll put a disclaimer on, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Whereas the Everest Core, or the Max, which includes the numpad, is available in this black or in this gunmetal that I have it in here. The black and the gunmetal, they look okay together, but they don't quite match, of course. It would look a lot better if it was the black with the black or the gunmetal with the gunmetal. I do hope that at some point in the future, Mountain will add gunmetal options for the MacroPad and DisplayPad here for folks that have the gunmetal version of the Everest Max. Anyway, it doesn't look bad as it is. Like I said, I mean, the black matches the keycaps and all that. And this is all just, stock. So you can, of course, change around the keycaps and all that if you like yourself. But anyway, aesthetically, it's a bit of a jumble, but it kind of works. Now, of course, if I wanted, I could remove this media dock up here, and I could attach the display pad where the media dock is, and then I would have a slightly more compact setup. But if you really want it all, if you want the Everest Core plus the numpad plus the media dock plus the MacroPad plus the display pad, this is kind of what you get. You could, of course, move this display pad wherever you like. You could put it up here where the MacroPad is. You could move it over here as an independent item on the left-hand side. I just put it here because this was the easiest way for me to fit it all in frame to show you guys. So, and of course, the Everest Max also comes with the wrist rest there. So it's a hell of a setup. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Like, if you want control over all of your software and your games, this will get you there. This is especially monstrous for me because I'm used to using like 60% or maybe 75% keyboards, which are like this big. So all this stuff out here is more than I'm used to having. So that's pretty cool. And like I said, it does make me feel powerful. It makes me feel like, I have control at my fingertips. Okay. The one other thing I did want to point out here was, each of these has to be plugged in individually. So the Everest Max has its own cable, which I have routed using the cable channels on the underside of the keyboard to snake through and come out up here. Also, the MacroPad has its own cable, so they both emerge up here, and I've used the cable wrap to kind of tie them together there. Then the DisplayPad has its own cable, emerges right here, and you can see all three of them kind of come together in a big bundle up there, which I've also wrapped together. And they kind of snake their way off of my desk to the right there. There's no way around it. You can have a lot of USB cables on your desk surface if you have this kind of setup with all of these components. And you know what? I think that's a bit of a shame because with Everest's Max, or Mountain's Everest Max, what they did was really elegant. This numpad, of course, is removable, hot swappable, basically on the fly. You can just detach it like this. It does not have an independent USB-C port. It just attaches to the ports on the side there. Then you can plug it back in, and it automatically detects it again. So, this is a very elegant setup. Same thing goes for the media dock up here. You can just remove it or put it back on. Has no, plug of its own or cable of its own. So it's a shame that Mountain deviated from that philosophy when it comes to the MacroPad and the DisplayPad. And I think it's even more of a shame because there are those USB Type-C connectors on the top here to accommodate the DisplayPad, and it just seems logical to me that they would try and use those for the media dock. I think I said DisplayPad. Anyway, there's too many devices here. I'm getting confused with my own setup. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I am disappointed that the MacroPad and the DisplayPad do not interface with the many USB ports on the Everest core, that instead they do require their own independent cables. Anyway, so that's my little piece there. So this is the setup, and as I've said, as somewhat clunky and ridiculous as this maybe is starting to look, it does give you a whole heck of a lot of control at your fingertips. So let's start off by looking at the software here. So this is Mountain's Basecamp software, and I like it quite a bit. It's one of my favorite pieces of keyboard software. It's certainly a lot better than what some competitors are offering. It feels polished and it's generally quite functional. On the home screen here, you can see we've got support links and store page and all that kind of thing. But more importantly, we have our devices plugged in here. We have the Everest customizable over here, and the MacroPad and DisplayPad can be configured over here. All of this works great. You can download it straight from Mountain's website, no problem, and it detected everything immediately. So that's excellent. So let's start off with our MacroPad here. Click into Customize. So just like with the keyboard itself, we have a profile system. You can create profiles for each device independently, but you can also choose to synchronize things like lighting across your profiles. So here you can see we've got a little depiction of our MacroPad here. We have the color wave effect on. We have it set to rainbow, but you can set it to dual color or single color. You have speed adjustment, backlight brightness, direction control, and here are our checkboxes for syncing across devices, which means, again, the lighting synchronizes between the MacroPad and the keyboard. And it would also synchronize with your Mountain mouse if you had that as well. And then you can also choose to synchronize across profiles. We have a bunch of different color effects, the same ones that you get with the base keyboard, which makes sense. You can obviously switch among them here just by clicking like so. and each one of them has, their own configuration options. If you want to customize lighting in a more granular way, we have a custom option down here, again, just with like the main keyboard. So, and of course, you can turn off the lighting if you like. So, all of those effects are the kinds of things that we would expect to see on any keyboard, and it's great that you can synchronize them between devices. Of course, where the MacroPad gets more interesting is the key binding section. So, by default, nothing is bound. So the way you bind it is very straightforward. You click on the key, and it gives you options here. OS commands, open a URL in your browser, execute a program, open a folder on your machine, run a macro as defined over here, which we'll look at in a moment, media controls, keyboard shortcuts, mouse controls, swapping profiles, OBS Studio commands, Adobe commands, and DaVinci Resolve commands. So most of these are pretty straightforward and self-explanatory, but let's take a closer look at the OBS options. Now, it'll probably complain at me that I don't have OBS open, because I don't. So, yeah, so here it wants you to connect using the WebSocket plugin to your OBS software. That's fine. We're not going to do that right now, but that setup is, easy to do. Oh, and what has it done here? Now it's decided that it doesn't like me for that. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, I suppose that's a bug of a sort. So I actually canceled out of the that dialog, and I thought that I might still be able to just look at what functions are available, but instead it appears to have locked the program. So I think I'm probably going to have to close out of it and start it again. That's my guess here. Okay, so that did appear to hard lock the software. I had to go kill it in Task Manager and start it up again. Not the end of the world, but apparently there are some bugs yet to be worked out in this version of the software. Generally, as I said earlier, my experience with the Basecamp software has been pretty good. It's been stable and reliable, but this is probably a newer revision of the software to support these new products, and there's just more going on here. So, at any rate, clearly still some bugs to be worked out. Let's take a look at the Adobe options here. So we can select our Adobe tool. Illustrator, Premiere Pro, or Photoshop are the supported ones. Let's pick Photoshop. And here we can select from a variety of functions. Rotating the brush tip, copying layers, free transform tool, things like that. Kind of an interesting selection of options. I'm not sure what dictated the options that they made available, but anyway, there's a handful there. And I don't use DaVinci Resolve, although I'd like to learn it. But it looks like, if we go to editing here, we have quite a few options. Splitting clip, fit to fill, these sorts of things. So that's handy if you use DaVinci Resolve, which I do not, but if you do, there it is. And of course, you can bind each individual key that way, all 12 of them. Gives you quite a bit of, flexibility or functionality across the MacroPad. Speaking of macros, of course, we have a macro recorder over here where we can do the basic sorts of things. We can, let's just call this one test. There we go. So we can hit record. It'll record our inputs. We can record the delay as entered at the time of recording the macro, or you can set custom delays. And then you can go in and edit. So let's just click, click, right click, There you go, stop recording. So there's all our various inputs, our clicks, keyboard inputs and whatnot, including the delays between them. And if we want, we can delete individual steps. We can move individual steps. The Basecamp macro recorder is quite in-depth and pretty good. So there you go. Currently unassigned, but of course we could go back to key binding and assign it to a particular key. For now, we're just going to delete it because we're not going to use that. And then finally, we have some settings here. We can reset to factory defaults. We can, open a quick start thing here. We can download the manual from MacroPad. Here gives us the firmware version, and we can check for updates. I did check for both the MacroPad and the DisplayPad. No firmware updates to be had yet. The Everest, however, since I last plugged it in, did in fact have a firmware update, and that downloaded and installed no problemo. So that is the situation with the MacroPad. Let's move on to the DisplayPad, which is perhaps a little more interesting. So once again, we have our basic profile system, just like our other devices. Here in key binding, however, things are a little different. Once again, nothing is bound to start with, so let's just select this here. We can select from a list of functions that is very much like what we had for the MacroPad, although we've got some other options here, I feel like. Create folder, open folder, clock and PC info. That's pretty interesting, as well as OBS Studio connections, Adobe DaVinci Resolve as before, and Twitch commands, which is pretty cool too. Many people will probably be using this as a streaming tool, so it makes sense to have those things there. Let's go take a look at. Actually, I'm curious about the PC stuff. Let's do that. So this presumably doesn't add a control, but what it will do is it will use the display key as a little readout. So we can select the PC info we want to see. Let's look at GPU here. And there it is. So you can see that right off the bat, we're at pretty low GPU usage, 2%. But that's presumably dynamic. So if I was to play a game, that would ramp up. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. I know it's pretty small and far away, but it's got a little icon with a picture of a GPU and a percentage readout. We can select a color for it, blue or black. And of course it all updates in real time, which is nice. What other kinds of PC info do we have here? Hard drive, internet, RAM. There you go. This is updated now to RAM. 17% RAM usage right now. So that's cool. Of course, it doesn't do anything when we press on it. It's just for display. But we can have things that look nice and are functional as well for pressing the button if we want. For example, let's say we wanted to, well, it doesn't really matter actually. We could set it to anything. Pardon my stomach. It has decided to protest. I don't know if you can hear that in the background, but it says it's snack time. But let's switch it to, let's try Twitch. Oh, okay. So of course it wants me to log in on Twitch, which makes total sense. And then it'll relay those commands, I guess, at the account level. I'm not going to do that right now, but I will test out the OBS Studio functionality and the Twitch functionality off camera afterwards, and I will let you know what I think of it, how it works. What else do we have here, though? Okay, this does allow us to look at the options here for Twitch. Chat message, viewers. I guess that brings up a, I don't know, viewers window to show all your viewers. Play ad, edit stream title or game, turn on sub chat only, slow mode, follower mode only, emote chat. I should make heavy use of that one. I tend to run so far behind in Twitch chat, you guys, at all times. Sometimes I have to throw on emote only chat just to get caught up. Actually, usually it's my moderators that enforce emote only chat in order to help me catch up. I'm just haplessly trying to get caught up. Create stream marker, clear chat, create clip, or open last clip. So that's a handy collection of Twitch functions. Things like muting the microphone, also something you might want to bind on here. Presumably those exist under the OBS Studio option, which I'm not going to open right now because I don't want to crash the software again. Anyway, so let's just set it up. I don't know, we'll say chat message. No, let's say it's emote chat. Yes, we know it wants me to log in. But what I can do, so by default, we have a little icon that looks like a little emote chat thing, which makes a lot of sense. But this is where things get fun. We can customize our icons. So we have a bunch that come built in, a handful of default ones for, say, launching software or, Gmail or whatever. We have icons specific to Adobe Illustrator, very cool. Specific to Photoshop, very cool. To Premiere, lots specific to Premiere. DaVinci Resolve, OBS Studio, quite a large icon library, and Twitch. All great to see. So this is one we currently are using, but even more fun than that, we can use custom images, and this works much like the display keys on the Everest Max numpad here. So we click here, we can browse. I'm going to pick one of my emotes. Let's pick my raid emote. Hit save, there it is. And by the way, this raid emote was made for me by friend of the channel, FamCam ASMR. If y'all aren't subbed to FamCam ASMR, well, what are you doing? Go subscribe to the man. He has some fantastic content here on YouTube and also good stuff on Twitch. So sub here on YouTube, follow him on Twitch. Shout out to my boy Keith. Great guy, awesome ASMR creator, and awesome artist. He also takes commissions. So if anyone's looking for some fun emotes and things like that, check out FamCam. All right, so we hit done. Boom, there it is. There's our raid icon, and it shows up right here on the display key. We can do that, of course, with all of our keys, and we can select whatever kind of function we want. So that is the power of the DisplayPad. And just like with our MacroPad, we can record macros. We can bind those macros to display keys here. And of course, we have a settings pane as well. We can set it to go to sleep after a period of time, handy feature. We have a brightness control, which I've got turned all the way down right now, so you can hopefully see this well. Hopefully. I know it's small, but hopefully the exposure allows you to at least see that there's an icon there. And I will say that the quality of the image, the little screen under the key, is really, really good. It is a dramatic step up, actually, in terms of viewing angles and in terms of resolution from the display keys on the Everest Max keypad. It looks much sharper. The color rendering looks better, and it's visible from pretty much any angle, which is great. Brightness, however, is also adjustable, which is great. So we turn it up there. It's very bright now. Turn it back down there. If you bring it all the way down, it actually turns right off. So that's nice too. Keep it at the level 1 notch there. We also have, just like with the MacroPad, reset to factory defaults, quick start wizard, DisplayPad manual, and update checker for the firmware. And that is pretty much that. So I'm going to spend some time testing all this out, both the MacroPad and the DisplayPad, and getting to know the functionality a little better. connecting it with my Twitch and with OBS, making sure that that all works properly. And then I'll let you know what I think. There will, of course, be no typing tests here tonight because, well, we're not reviewing the keyboard. Again, if you want to hear and see this in action, I do have a video where I review it, but there's really not much to do with the MacroPad and DisplayPad in terms of typing test, but functionality, absolutely. So I'm going to go do that. And then with the magic of editing, in just a second here, I will tell you all about my usage experience. All right, so we've of course had a chance to unbox and inspect both the MacroPad and the DisplayPad, and we've looked at the functionality and the software and all that sort of thing. I've had quite a while to test these things out, use them day to day, but the first thing I should be really honest about is that I didn't find myself using them day to day. I found that for my usage patterns, I really had to make an effort to break out of my usual usage habits and find reasons to use either the MacroPad or the DisplayPad. And this review has actually taken me quite a while to complete, and I think part of the reason is because I just felt that I wasn't using these often enough to properly evaluate them, which sounds kind of damning, but it's not. It's not intended to be. It's more of a statement about my usage patterns. Maybe I'm just not enough of a power user to make use of these kinds of accessories regularly, or maybe I'm just very set in my ways. You know, I have my ways of doing things and they work and I like to stick to them. So I guess I bring this up as sort of a word of warning, or just something to think about if you're considering picking up one of these, which is that make sure you have a good use case for it, or make sure that you are willing to actually put in the time to customize and set them up and to use them. Or don't. If you just like them because they're cool, that's fine too. I will say there is a real cool factor to having like a million buttons arrayed in front of you. When I had this set up with the Everest Max and its numpad and the MacroPad and the DisplayPad, it felt like a battle station. That was very cool. But I guess for me, I'm a little bit more of a minimalistic kind of user when it comes to my control inputs. Less is often more for me, I think. And like I said, I kind of get set in my ways of doing things. So that's just something to consider before you pull the trigger on these. There are other things to consider as well, which we'll talk about here as well. I did eventually settle into using these. Primarily, I use the MacroPad for editing videos, including the video that you are seeing right now. And I really did like it once I started getting used to it, but I had to learn, or I had to take the time to figure out what controls I wanted on here, how I wanted them arranged, and then I had to commit that to, say, muscle memory so that I could use this as quickly and effectively as I would use, say, the normal shortcuts on my keyboard. But as I used it more, I came to appreciate it more. And what my favorite thing is the ability to use my mouse with my right hand and have the MacroPad set up with shortcuts on my left hand and never have to take my hand off my mouse. It basically, once I got it down, set up in a way that I liked, it felt very streamlined, very efficient, and I could see that if I continue to use this, it will without a doubt become my preferred way of editing video, simply because of that boost in efficiency. It just took a little while to get over that hump to the point where I felt like this was really making me more efficient. I think 12 keys is about the minimum you would want for something like this. I did find myself wishing it had a few more for video editing specifically, but I could more or less get the setup that I wanted on here, and it worked great. It did everything that it needed to do. I never had any issues with the MacroPad. One feature that I discovered in the software that I really like actually is the ability to drag and drop bindings. So let's say you have, I don't know, cutting your video bound to M1, but you actually want it down here on M8. You just click and drag the binding and drop it onto M8. Boom, automatically rebound. So I found that really handy for quickly, resorting, reorganizing layouts, and sort of testing it out and then changing it up a bit, testing it out, that sort of thing. And I imagine that this would apply to people editing audio as well, or working on, images in Photoshop or something. I'm sure you could integrate this effectively into your workflow. So that was good. Positive usage experience. The DisplayPad I use primarily for streaming, right? Because that's largely how it's marketed. It's kind of marketed towards gamers, but especially streamers, people who might be considering something like an Elgato Stream Deck, which I've mentioned a lot in this video and will mention more before the end of it, because that's a really important competitor, a really important comparison point for the DisplayPad. I took quite some time to get used to using this while streaming, and I'm not even really, I wouldn't even say I am used to it yet. And I'm not sure why that is. Again, I think it's just because I really do get set in my ways of doing things. But I set it up with some useful functions like mute, like muting my microphone, mute and unmute, like slow mode for Twitch chat, which I make pretty liberal use of, emote only chat, clearing the chat, changing scenes, these sorts of things. And it works well for it when I remember to use it. But it seems to do the job pretty well. I will say that there is more functionality here than I could really make use of or appreciate, especially with its folders function, which we didn't talk about in the software, but it basically allows you to bind certain keys to, or any key, to a folder where when you press on that, it opens up a whole new set of nested functions, right? So you can nest, I think, infinite layers of functions within folders. And so, it has 12 hardware keys, but you can get a whole lot of functionality into this. I will say, as the kind of streamer that I am, I don't make a whole lot of use of like overlay elements or crazy effects or like soundboards or like animated GIFs or whatever. I know a lot of streamers do. That's just not really my vibe, I guess, when I'm streaming. But I certainly know, many streamers do have a lot more sort of enhancements that they need access to, quick access to, in which case I think this would be really, really good for them. For me, it's nice to have those functions like mute and unmute mic and slow mode and all that stuff with dedicated buttons, but I wouldn't say it was a game changer for me, because again, I sort of have my usual ways of activating that stuff, which I'm just used to. But I'm going to keep using this, and I'm going to keep looking for more ways to exercise its functionality, because I think, like the MacroPad, the more I use it, the more I'm going to come to appreciate it and like having it. So that was basically the usage experience with these things. They're good. The one thing I will say that I'm not a big fan of is the fact that, yes, each one of them has its own dedicated USB cable. I already sort of groused about this a bit earlier in the video, and again, I will bring it up again before the end, but having that many cables snaking across my desk, no matter how I tried to organize them, it just never really looked that good. And also the number of USB ports on my PC they use up is a bit of a problem, because I have lots of peripherals and USB ports are at a premium. So And I will also say I did run into a couple other bugs in the Basecamp software, specifically with the DisplayPad. There was an issue where it seemed to forget the image that I had bound in the number 1 slot here, the first button. The others saved fine. The first one seemed to be forgotten upon reboot. That only happened once, but I did have some other weirdness trying to bind a few functions to that first slot. And I think the functionality was still working, but the image, the icon, wasn't showing up the way it was supposed to. So it's not a defect with the screen, like the display button itself works just fine. It was some kind of software issue with Basecamp not remembering the icon that was bound to it, I'm pretty sure. So a few weird little bugs like that with Basecamp, which is unfortunate because I've had pretty good experiences with the Basecamp software in the past. So hopefully Mountain can continue to iterate on that software as they do. They've released a couple of updates while I've been testing these things, and smooth out those bugs. So that is pretty much what I have to say about the usage experience, sort of day-to-day usage with these items. And it is now time for me to run down the pros, some of the things I liked about these, and the cons, the things I don't like so much. And then I will give you my final verdict. Let's get to it. Over here for the pros, there's quite a few things that I like about these. The first is that nice, thick, brushed aluminum top plate. Looks good, feels good. Can't complain about that. The second is the inclusion for the MacroPad specifically of Mountain's excellent custom switches. I really like Mountain's house switches. I think they're a lot better than, say, Cherry's switches, or even some of the other common budget-oriented switches from manufacturers like Gateron or Outemu or Kale and that kind of thing. So happy to see Mountain's really nice factory lubed switches on there. Speaking of switches, it's great that the MacroPad is hot swap compatible. That means that if you did want to put your own switches on there, you can easily do so, no soldering required, and it supports both 3 and 5-pin switches, which is great to see. For the DisplayPad, I was really impressed with the sharpness and the vibrance and the viewing angles on the display keys. Like I remarked earlier, it is a vast improvement over the display keys on the Everest Max numpad, especially in terms of the viewing angles. I think that's because they've used an IPS screen here, which is a screen technology that's much more robust to deviations from a straight-on viewing angle in terms of like the color and things like that. So yeah, I think the display keys look really, really nice. And it's really fun too that they also support animated GIFs if you want to go that way. Speaking of animated GIFs and customizing your display pad, I do think that generally Mountain's Basecamp software is intuitive and quite good. It is certainly one of the better pieces of keyboard or keypad customization software that I've used. And to me, it all just flows nicely, makes sense, and generally works pretty well, with a couple of small caveats. We'll mention that in the cons, but overall, it's appealing, intuitive, fully functional software. And finally, I think the DisplayPad in particular is quite competitively priced. Its regular price is $110 US, and that's right around half the cost of an Elgato Stream Deck, which is one of this product's major competitors. Now, granted, the Stream Deck does have 3 additional keys beyond the DisplayPad here, but that still seems like a pretty solid deal to me for something that's about half the price. So the MacroPad, I'm a little less certain is a great deal, but certainly I think the DisplayPad is very competitively priced. Over here for the cons, the things that I'm less than thrilled about with these products. There are a handful of them. So the first is exclusive to the MacroPad, which is that I think the keycaps they've included feel cheap. I called this out earlier in the review. I called it out in my Everest Max review. They're just these coated, very thin plastic keycaps. You can get much better keycaps for really, really cheap. So I understand that Mountain went with that style of keycap to keep aesthetic consistency with the Everest Max, which you might be using the MacroPad with. But really, I still think that they should just update all their keycaps, including those on the Everest Max, to be like the really nice shine-through double-shot PBT keycaps that they include stock on the Everest 60 keyboard, or like their Mountain Mineral Series keycaps, which are their optional keycaps that you can buy for their keyboards. Those are great. They look good. They feel good. Much nicer than the ones that come on the MacroPad. My second point is another kind of aesthetic quibble, which is that both the MacroPad and DisplayPad are only available in black. It looks good. I mean, they look great in black, but they do offer the Everest Max and Core in other colors, like gunmetal, which is the color that I have. It would be nice to be able to match the colors of the DisplayPad and MacroPad to your Everest Max or Core. So I hope that they expand and allow and offer like a gunmetal option for these in the future. It's a pretty small thing. Just thought it was worth mentioning. What is not a small thing, however, is that each of these accessories requires its own dedicated USB-C cable, and this is probably my biggest disappointment with these keypad products, especially considering Mountain's really very slick numpad, detachable numpad that they include, or that you can get for the Everest Max and for the Everest 60, that doesn't require an additional cable. So if you want to have, your keyboard plus each of these additional accessories, that's 3 large, sort of chunky black USB cables snaking across your desk, which, no matter how you cable manage that, is going to look a little bit messy and is prone to turning into cable spaghetti. So I think it was it's a missed opportunity from Mountain, and I'm a little surprised that they didn't bother to integrate them better with the USB ports on the Everest Max, especially since it has the USB-C ports right there. I imagine there must be some technical reason why they didn't, but I wish that they had been able to overcome it. And similarly, it's pretty disappointing that these do not attach onto the Everest 60, which, as I've mentioned, is one of my favorite keyboards of the year. Now, I understand there's like size constraints with the 60% keyboard, but I still think that it would be really fun to stick a MacroPad and a DisplayPad onto a 60% keyboard, slap on that detachable numpad, and you've basically built back up from a 60% keyboard to something beyond a 100% keyboard, or similar to a 100% keyboard, which I think would just be fun and absurd. But yeah, it's just a bit disappointing that they have to be just standalone if you're using them with the Everest 60. And the last thing I'll mention is something I have brought up a couple of times already, but that is there's a few software bugs that I ran into with the Basecamp software that made it feel just a bit jankier than I would like. You actually saw one in the video where, it locked up after I couldn't, put in the OBS information for connecting it to OBS. So, but there were a few others I encountered as well. And as I've said previously, I've had a really good experience using the Basecamp software. I think it's generally pretty good. So it was just a bit disappointing to encounter these bugs, and hopefully Mountain can continue to squash those and smooth those over for a better software experience. So what then is my final verdict on Mountain's new MacroPad and DisplayPad? well, I'm going to talk in generalities more or less about both of them here, but I'll specify if I have something to say about one or the other in particular. Overall, I think these are good products. I think they look pretty good. I think they're pretty well built. And I think they have all the features that you would want or expect out of these kinds of products. However, I can't help but feel just a little bit disappointed with these products, primarily because I've seen Mountain do some really, really awesome stuff in past, and I wish they had just brought a little bit more of that to these products. In particular, it's pretty disappointing that you need a dedicated USB cable for each of these products individually, leading to, cable clutter on your desk surface and having to use up many more USB ports on your machine. Maybe this is just something that really bothers me. I don't know, but I think it's just a very inelegant solution. And I really wish they'd found a way to integrate both of these products with the Everest Max keyboard, or the Core, I suppose, however you want to call it. Because, again, that keyboard has USB Type-C ports on the top where these things mount on, and they already use those ports for their media dock thing. So that's how I expected these things to work before I actually got my hands on them, and I'm just pretty disappointed that they don't. I'm also somewhat disappointed that they don't work well. They don't mount onto the Everest 60. The Everest 60 is a fantastic keyboard, and I think it would just be so much absurd fun to be able to stick the DisplayPad and the MacroPad onto the top of the Everest 60 and build this 60% monstrosity. But form factor and size constraints mean that they do not mount on there. You'll have to have them separately if you want to use them with your Everest 60. I also encountered a handful of software bugs, which I suspect will get patched out over time. Mountain seems to be pretty good about regularly updating Basecamp and supporting their software side of things, but it did make the Basecamp software feel a bit jankier than I was used to it feeling, and I have used it in past and liked it quite a bit, so that was just a wee bit disappointing, I suppose. In terms of pricing, I think the MacroPad is actually a little bit on the pricey side for what it is. It's well built and it's very functional, but for $60, you can get a full 60% keyboard with hot swap sockets and better quality keycaps to boot. So that makes that price a little bit hard to swallow. On the other hand, I think the DisplayPad is actually really competitively priced when you look at other products on the market. For example, the Elgato Stream Deck, which I keep bringing up. The DisplayPad is about half the price of the Elgato Stream Deck, and granted, the Stream Deck does have 3 extra buttons beyond what the DisplayPad has, but that still seems like a pretty darn solid deal to me when you consider the pricing of $110 for the DisplayPad, the functionality it offers, the quality of the display keys, and just the whole package. So I think that the DisplayPad itself is quite competitively priced. Overall, both the DisplayPad and the MacroPad are good products, but just not quite as awesome as I think they could be, and not quite as awesome as what I've come to expect from Mountain. Nevertheless, they are both absolutely worth considering if you are looking to expand your control options, your customization options, if you are one of those power users that can make use of these kinds of accessories. And that's especially so if you are already in Mountain's hardware or software ecosystem. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another relaxing review. big thanks to Mountain for sending over the product samples that we looked at here today. There are, of course, links down below at the top of the video description, where you can click through and check out both the MacroPad and the DisplayPad on Mountain's website. And I will remind you that if you are watching this video right after it comes out or within a few days after that, Mountain has their Black November sale going on right now to the end of November 2022 with some crazy savings, like on these products, but also on their keyboards. I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but they have their Everest 60, which is a lovely 60% keyboard, one of my favorite surprises of this year, regularly for $140, on sale for $80 US. If you are looking for a 60% keyboard, you basically have to look no further. It's a fantastic board. That's a crazy price. Go check it out. Even if it's after the fact, go check out what Mountain has to offer. They really do have some really innovative and cool stuff, including the products we looked at here today. And of course, hey, special thanks to each and every one of you for watching this. I hope you found it informative, and I hope you found it relaxing. And I look very forward to having you back here next time for another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Bye for now, my friends.